20, 30 years ago. Why is this?
Well, I mean, I honestly believe that trade unions today are more relevant than they ever were. And, you know, getting young workers to join trade unions is always a difficult task, probably because you have a very hostile employer class. You have employer class who are prepared to spend millions undermining terms and conditions of employment and the ability for workers to act collectively in terms of collective bargaining. You have many major retailers, for instance, who are extremely anti-union, won't allow their workers to join the trade union movement or to be represented by the trade union movement, and who will go to the Supreme Court and the High Court to prove that and dismantle any decency thresholds which exist. So it's an extremely undercurrent of anti-worker, anti-trade union undercurrent among major employers, which frightens workers, particularly at times of recession and people trying to hang on to it. It frightens workers. And really the trade union movement is the only thin red line which will make progress. Without the trade union movement, the conditions of the Dublin working class would be exactly the same today as they were 100 years ago. The trade union movement won many, many welfare benefits, many, many wage increases, the 8-hour day, overtime rates, Sunday premium, and all those things were won. They were fought for and won. They weren't given, handed over by employers. And I think, you know, we need to generate now a movement which has a vision, which people can subscribe to, which people can actually take action and fight battles to win better conditions and to stop the slide, to stop the race to the bottom. But there's no doubt about it, there's a race to the bottom. We have thousands of members in the retail trade who are in precarious employment, who are living hand to mouth, maybe getting 2 hours a day, 3 hours a day work, not knowing what their hours are from week to week. That is the subsistence working. And I mean, major profitable multinational companies, there's no justification for that. And it's all as workers want is a decent day's work and a decent day's pay, or a decent week's work and a decent week's pay. And that's where the trade union movement is relevant. It's the biggest civil society organisation in Ireland.
John, do you go along with that?
I don't think, with respect, that the reason young people in particular aren't joining trade unions is because they're scared of their employers. I think one of the reasons that young people in particular aren't joining trade unions is that they see the president of SIPTU, for example, and lots of the public sector unions going around on six-figure plus salaries calling themselves socialists. I think that they look at the Croke Park deal, where every worker in that deal earning €65,000 or under was protected, and they see the leaders of many...
The core pay was protected.
Core pay of €65,000.
But not you can't say they were protected generally, but go on.
Core pay of €65,000 and below was protected. And they see the trade unions, many of the leaders of trade unions, running around saying that is unacceptable when you have in the private sector a whole lot of people earning a whole lot less than that. So I think one of the reasons, and by the way, finally, I think an awful lot of workers looking at this country and they see a trade union movement negotiating with the government and at the same time being the largest single donor to one of the parties in the state. And I think, Vincent, that if it were the case that a major employer in this state was negotiating with the government while being the single largest donor to the Fine Gael party, you would probably do about 5 shows about it, but no one seems to object to the fact that you have a lot of fat cats at the top of the trade unions negotiating with the Labour Party while pumping funds into that party. It is corruption, and it is the exercise of political influence unduly on politicians and government by any other name. And I think an awful lot of people are cynical about it. And will listen, John, to you coming here. I'm not ashamed to say it, because no one else will say it. The fact is that you have...
I've ever heard in my life.
Well, calling it bull is certainly going to persuade people.
The fact is and demonise individuals that you don't know, for a start, right?
I have not demonised anyone. I have laid out facts. The largest single donor to the Labour Party, holding the purse strings of one of the parties in government, and then complaining that you can't get anything done. You have one of the parties in the government...
That's your problem.
No, you interrupted. I was finishing my point.
There are 3 unions out of 65 who are affiliated to the Labour Party. My own union, which is a solely private sector union, is affiliated to no political party. We're beholden to nobody. And at the end of the day, we represent low-paid workers, workers in the retail trade, the vast majority women, the vast majority part-time, the vast majority young workers. And we make no apologies for that. And I think to come on and make generalised statements like that, demonising trade union leaders in a broad brushstroke, is an absolute disgrace. And to mention the word corruption.
Perhaps it's a case of 90% giving 10% a bad name.
Well,
but I mean,
that's forward. That's skewed again. Nonsense stuff.
The kind of thing you just said, you know why people don't join unions. You don't know why people don't join unions. You don't know why people do join unions either, if it comes to that. There's been a fair amount of research into this, by the way, and it shows that people still join unions for the same reasons they always did, and that's protection. The single most important reason for joining a trade union in some work we did in the UK some years ago was protection if I have a problem at work. That result was replicated over here in 2008 by people at UCD. That's the first thing. The second thing is about opportunity to join a trade union. And that is very easily denied to people. People forget, you know, about how hard it is to set up a union in the workplace. Ford's in Britain, highly unionised workplace. 30 years it took to get trade union recognition in that company. I think this notion that young people look at these things about socialism, so-called socialism, and that's the reason why they join or not join, it's really uninformed. It's not anything real.
John, do you want to respond to that?
I do. I think there are a couple of things. I mean, number one, you can trace the decline of the trade union movement in the US and the UK to the abolition of closed shops. There was a period in the middle of the 20th century whereby in many, many workplaces you couldn't get a job unless you were willing to join the trade union. And you know, you can argue the to's and fro's of forcing people to be a member of a private organisation if they want to earn a living. But certainly the abolition of that has had a huge impact. Secondly, I would say that, you know, an awful lot of companies, now you look at a company like Google, which employs a large number of people in this city, who have a policy of not having trade union representation in their workplace. But those companies also, by and large, particularly in the skills sector, offer the best terms and conditions. And in fact, a lot of workers, you go and talk to people in Google, you go to talk to people working in Intel or Dell in Limerick, where there are no trade unions, would say that they have some of the best working environments in the state in return for that. So, I mean, I think that there are an awful lot of people who look at the trade unions and see a bunch of old grey men fighting the battles of the 1970s and the 1980s and are frankly perfectly happy with the working conditions they have. And also, by the way, look at the results of the trade union movement in this country over the last 15, 20 years. All you've done, by and large, is engage in a partnership process which aligned your own nests, and primarily the nests of the people at the very top of the trade union movement. And now you are entirely unwilling to play your part, particularly in the public sector, in the recovery. So I think there are an awful lot of people who are completely... And by the way, John, the size of that march this evening...
Hold on. The trade union movement has played their part for many years in this country. The trade union movement and workers generally, right, are not going to carry another 5 or 6 austerity budgets on their back to protect the bankers, the speculators, the people who you think are the knights in shining armour of this country. You mentioned the Googles and the eBays and whoever else you mentioned. Go and talk about the Lidls and the Aldis and some retailers, right, who will not allow, I'm not finished yet, who will not allow a trade union into the door, who will not allow their staff to join and be represented by a trade union. What are they afraid of? If we're that ineffective, why are they afraid of the staff joining a trade union? They're afraid of the staff joining a trade union because trade unions will improve terms and conditions of employment for low-paid workers. As I said, our union and many unions operate in the private sector and only in the private sector. We're dealing with crisis situations every day of the week. We're dealing with attacks on workers' rights. A group of very wealthy and very profitable owners of restaurants and hotels went down to the High Court to dismantle basic decency standards in the hotel and restaurant sector. Why? Because they could. And that's the reason why. What are they trying to achieve? They're trying to achieve a race to the bottom, and the trade union movement is the only thin line to stop that race to the bottom. You can pick as many blue chip companies as you like, but when push comes to shove, the only protection for decent pay and decent conditions of employment is a trade union movement. And you can throw all the generalisations about old grey-headed men you want, but it doesn't stick. Because at the end of the day, nothing wrong with anyway, Vincent's old and grey. I keep dyeing my hair at the end of the day, so I'm not going to follow that category. I'm afraid to grow a beard now, for obvious reasons, but you'll be slagging me for having a beard. But at the end of the day, the trade union movement is effective, and that's the reason that a lot of employers are afraid to let their staff join a trade union and terrorise them and intimidate them not to join a trade union, and that's the real problem. So you can cherry pick all you like, but the trade union movement is a line in the sand, and we remain to be a line in the sand, and workers should join trade unions, and they are joining trade unions, and we're not weak and we're not ineffective.